Hello, Shoyan here. Today I'm cutting and planing the pine wood that will be exposed. Then I'll move on to some preparations before framing. First, I start by hand planing the wood, which is about 20 pieces of pine. Before that, I sharpen the blade. It's best to keep the plain blade sharp, but whenever I take it out thinking it'll cut smoothly, it almost never does. So I always sharpen it on site. As you can see, I use two whetstones, a regular king stone around 1000 to 1200 grit, and then a fine grit stone. In some videos, people sharpen in 3 or 4 stages, but I haven't seen carpenters do it in 4 stages in practice. Usually, 3 stages are enough: a 1000 to 1200 grit stone, a medium grit stone, and then a fine grit stone. This building is a compact and charming house with a lot of exposed pine timber. I think there are about 20 flat beams. I'll finish them by hand planing them. Pre-cut services handle rough cuts, but not the final finishing work. They will run a super surfacer for columns, but beams around 300 to 360 millimeters thick are too large for their machines. So the carpenter finishes those by hand. No matter how often I hand plane, it's always challenging. Hand planing straight planks or columns that have run through the jointer and planer is straightforward if you keep the hand plane sharpened and adjusted. But flat beams are a different story. Flat beams are often prone to warping, and if planed too much, they'll end up smaller than intended. If 2 exposed beams join, there could be a gap if they're planed down too far. I aim to keep the beams as close to the specified size as possible, especially where the wood will show. So I can't completely straighten the wood even if they are warped. It's hard to explain, but I adjust my planing based on how the wood will be used. Now, I've finished planing the flat pine beams. Pine always looks nice after planing. Next, I'll attach the footings at the base of the 3 porch columns. For columns like these, we usually use metal footings which look like a trophy cup or stones. In the past, we often used natural stones, but building codes now require the column to be secure to the concrete slab, for example with bolts. So we don't use natural stones anymore. During the last step of the Sill installation, I mark the height for the hardware. Whether I'm placing columns on stones or attaching metal footings, I set each one in position and measure the height on site. This method is the most accurate. However, if columns are in 3 different positions and the height from the ground to the roof differs by, say, 15 millimeters, it's too noticeable. But if the difference is only 5 or 6 millimeters, using the measured height at each position works fine. For anything greater, I use shims under the columns to align the height. There are various shapes of metal footings, but the insertion part on this one is slightly smaller than the column. So I need to trim down the column to fit the cup. This footing will be secured with 2 screws from the side. I could only use the circular saw, but in my experience, it can't fully reach the tenon shoulder. This time, I'm using a groove cutter. Once the blade depth is set, all 4 sides will have the same depth. I used the circular saw to make a small, neat cut, then groove 1 centimeter deep with the groove cutter from there. This method ensures that all 4 sides are uniform.
でこんだけ余裕見てある。この節が欲しかったな。
Next, I attach the trophy cup metal footing. I position the screws so that they face sideways when viewed from the front. Now, the 3 porch columns are done. Time to move on to the porch roof rafters. Since these will be exposed, they were run through the jointer and planer by the pre-cut service. But I go over them with an electric plane for a smooth finish. Finally, protective sheets are being applied to the flat pine beams I've planed. This is just for framing day, but beams can get scratched from contact with wires or get dirty, and those marks are tough to remove. Even if it's for just one day, it's worth adding protection. Next, we prepare the hardware. We set up the washers and Hagoita bolts as a set. The amount of hardware doesn't always directly match the building size. Larger wood requires 2 Hagoita bolts per piece, while the hardware usually matches the building size. It can double depending on the wood dimensions. In the past, we used much less hardware, just a few Hagoita bolts and angle brace bolts on the corners of the log under the first floor roof as a precaution. But to protect against the strong earthquakes that are now occurring, the amount of required hardware has increased. Today is transportation day, 2 days before the framing. We'll unload the timber using a unique truck which has a small crane mounted directly on it. If the space is tight or there's already scaffolding, we use a crane truck for about half a day. But generally, we use the unique truck. Fortunately, this site has enough space to spread out the timbers by type without stacking, which really speeds up the work. I finished planing the exposed beams, cutting the column tenons, and other pre-framing tasks. The timbers are finally unloaded, so everything is ready for framing. Tomorrow, the scaffolding will go up, and the day after, we begin the framing. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.